Welcome to the Together for Good podcast, a podcast specifically designed to inspire, challenge, and uplift you during your daily walk of faith. Today's episode is a continuation of our Lenten series about a change in perspective. Each week of the Lenten season, we'll be posting an episode where you're going to be invited to think about an old, tried and true scripture story in a different way. Today's episode, I'm really excited to share it with you. I bring on Intern Rita and we have a conversation. We thought that this would make for a more interesting and more dynamic episode if we were talking about the insights that she has about Genesis chapter 2. So Intern Rita does a great job with the unpacking of this biblical text and really giving you a very different way of thinking about it. I hope that I do a decent enough job asking the types of clarifying questions that you probably are dying to ask as you listen to it. And yeah, it's a really delightful conversation. Hope you enjoy it. Hope it gives you something new to think about during this Lenten season, to just look at your faith in a different way. That's what Lent provides us with, is this opportunity to shift things. As always, thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing these episodes with family and friends. But now, a conversation between Intern Rita and I about Genesis chapter 2 from a different perspective. Hey, everybody. It's the Together for Good podcast. Thanks for listening. I'm sitting here with
Intern Rita.
Intern Rita on the podcast. So we are in the midst of Lent, and we're doing this whole Change in Perspective series on the podcast, where we're going to be looking at familiar Bible stories and maybe giving you some new things to think about. Intern Rita had the great idea of doing this conversationally. Mm-hmm. She's the one that's done all the research. She has all the really interesting points, as you might guess. It deals with some ancient Hebrew language, which is definitely her jam and not mine. But we're going to talk about this. So, Intern Rita, what story have you selected for us today?
So, for this story, we have to go way back.
Way back.
Way
Let's
back.
get in the way back machine.
Like, before Jesus walked on the earth.
Okay.
Before the kings. Before the prophets.
Oh, my gosh.
Before Abraham, even.
Before Noah?
Before Noah.
But wait, before Pastor Gary?
Before Pastor Gary.
I hope he listens to this.
No. Way before Pastor Gary, we're going back to the ever-familiar story of Adam and Eve.
Adam and Eve, as found in Genesis chapter 2.
Yep.
And so this is one of our creation stories. There's, in case you didn't know, here's a change in perspective, right? 2 creation stories.
There are, yep.
Genesis chapter 1 kind of tells it one way. Genesis 2 tells it a different way.
Yeah, I mean, Genesis chapter 2 literally starts with another telling of the creation.
Does it really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Oh my gosh, you're totally right. Another telling of the creation story. And really what's cool, Genesis 1 kind of deals like on a macro level. Mm-hmm. And this is more about people.
Micro and like our relationship with God and that like intimate God walking among us even before Jesus walked on the earth.
Oh, cool. Okay. So if we're looking at Genesis 2, my assumption, my current perspective, yes. This is the story, and God creates Adam, and then Adam needs a companion, so God creates animals, and then God still thinks like, oh shoot, Adam's still lonely, so then God takes Adam's rib and is like, here's Eve, and they live happily ever after in the garden.
Well, then the serpent tells Eve to...
This is true. This is true.
Of good and evil.
But we won't get to that, because that's Genesis chapter 3.
That's chapter 3. And then they're kicked out of the garden, blah, blah. But we're going to stick with chapter 2. And I think your telling is good. I mean, it's like definitely like the surface level. If you just read the story, it's kind of what we were told in Sunday school and what we're often preaching.
Did you watch like some of those cartoons growing up? Like
yeah.
Good Book and the Hanna-Barbera? Oh man, that's my childhood right there. Yeah, and they always tell it in the same way, and it's like Adam and it's Eve and they're in the garden, blah blah blah. Yep.
Okay, so I might be
change my perspective.
I might be blowing your mind right now. What if I would tell you that Adam is never named in chapter 2 of Genesis?
I would want to check my Bible. Seriously.
Yeah.
He doesn't get a name until later.
Adam doesn't get a name till later. We do see references to a man. And if we look at the Hebrew for that...
I knew this was coming.
Yep. Well, you did reference that I was going to bring in the Hebrew.
Here we are.
Expect it. It's coming right away. So the Hebrew for that is Ha-Adam. And so that is where Adam and Adam, that's where that name comes from. However, Ha-Adam, is probably better translated as either human or earthling. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a man. It's more just like this little dust creature that God has made and then breathed.
So it's more of it's not a proper noun. It wouldn't be capitalized in English, at least. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. But it sounds like Adam. Mm-hmm. So that's probably, right, like somewhere that's where it got turned into this title of Adam. Yeah. But really it's a Hebrew word, ha'adam, that's not a proper noun, that means earthling.
Yep. And it's related to another Hebrew word, which is adamah, which means earth or clay. So it's literally tying it to that, like I said, like this little earthling that's made from like the dust and dirt and clay of the earth, and then breathed life into. So that I really appreciate when people are named Adam now, because I'm like, oh, you're a little earthling. When we just had Ash Wednesday, not too long ago, we remember that we were dust, and to dust we shall return, and like, this is literally getting to that. Like, the name Adam is just like this reminder of like that dust that we were made from and the dust that we'll return to.
This creature formed of the dust. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Keep going. You're blowing my mind. This is really good.
Yeah. So while this like little earthling or Ha'adam is gender language, because that's how Hebrew works, it's similar to Spanish that has el and la that are associated with individual words, but you don't necessarily think of like a library having a gender or a book having
totally.
a gender.
So, and I studied German, and it was der, die, das. Mm-hmm. And so like cheese is die Käse. And you don't think of cheese as having a gender, but that's like the female article that's attached to it.
Right.
So, interesting. Okay.
Right. So we can just think of this as just kind of a, like I said, little earth, like not necessarily having a gender at this point, just like kind of this little humanoid running around. However, like that doesn't mean like that this earth like wasn't set apart from everything else in creation, because we're told that they're made in the image of God, which is often referred to as imago Dei in Latin. So again, that's like image of God, literally. So
I want to ask about that. Is there in Genesis 2 some sort of like, where are you getting that from? Because when I always think about imago Dei, I think of Genesis 1, where I think it's 127, and God says, "Let us make humankind in our image," and so God created them. In the image of God, they were created.
Yeah. So kind of pulling from that, people pull from that story and then just assume that that's where, when God was making this little earthling in the second telling, that's also the same kind of implication of like that they would be made in the image of God.
Same idea.
Yeah, same idea. So from the beginning, there's a special relationship between like this earthling and God, in terms of being created of the earth, and then this relationship of like intimate relationship with God in that creation process, and in that God was there amongst or on the earth walking with this human.
Wow, that special of a relationship. Mm-hmm. And that's so interesting to think about, is that's right. This is, as we've mentioned, like this is one of the oldest stories in our scriptures. Yeah. And it specifically is tying into this idea of like what at the beginning, right? The essence, the way it should be, is with God walking with us and among us. Yeah. Which to me just gives a whole new, like another layer to how we understand the importance of Jesus's incarnation, right? Like Jesus walking and being with us. Yeah. This is the way it was in the very beginning, actually. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay.
However, fairly early on, God recognized like the need for this little earthling to have community and like a companion. And I can imagine that while there's a special relationship with God and this human, there is still like a difference between God and the human. And if God is, wanting to create everything else, or, is pulled to like deal with this task over here or that task over there, like, I mean, we can imagine God is busy with a bunch of things that maybe they wouldn't always be able to be right there walking with the human, like they're always they're watching over and everything like that, but God recognized that maybe they needed to make like some sort of companion to go with this little earthling, and so they So I think of this in terms of if we zoom out and think of the Trinity. We often talk about the Trinity as kind of this dance of relationship where, the Trinity is one and yet three and yet one. And so they're like in it all together, but then also doing stuff for one another and that kind of thing. We talk about the Spirit and Jesus and God and it's just like this dance of relationship. And if we think of ourselves as being made in the image of God, it makes sense that there would also be like this deep-seated need for relationship.
Definitely.
Within
us
and our communities and everything.
Right, and I love the way you've just done that, because I do think that there's something really important. Well, it's why I love the idea of the Trinity. It's so complicated and it seems so weird, and for so much of my life I'm like, this is stupid. Yeah. But to say no, God exists as some type of community, right? Because you think about it, a community is a group of people, yet one community. Mm-hmm. And that's what, right, we say God is three and yet one. So God exists as some sort of form of loving community. Mm-hmm. And we're made in God's image, so we need community.
We need to be part of the community too.
If you've read my one of the devotionals for Lent is about what can teen boy bands teach us about God. And this is the exact point of teen boy bands are always made. I go through the whole thing, and it's they sing in 5-part harmony, and so that's why New Kids on the Block, everyone loved it. It was 5-part harmony, and then you have Backstreet Boys, and then you have NSYNC, and then you have One Direction. It's every 10 years this happens, and because when people sing in 5-part harmony, it lights up the brain differently. So this is a strategy of it. But I love that idea of we love we're drawn towards communal singing. We're drawn towards 5-part harmony. That there's just something within us that needs another person, another. Yeah. Which I'm guessing is where you're going with this.
It is where I'm going.
Okay. Spoiler alert. Keep going.
No, but I also love the shameless plug for you.
Absolutely.
Where else are you going to plug it? No. So God tries to make another earthling as was done before. So when Ha-Adam was made, God tries that again. Except for this one comes out with gills and fins and is not quite like the earthling from before. And so the earthling actually gets tasked with naming all these creatures that God is trying to make, these earthlings that God is trying to
Whoa.
make. Yeah, and so...
So wait, is this how, are you pulling from Jewish rabbis' interpretation of this?
No,
this is how it comes across in Hebrew?
In the text it says that God... formed another, tried to form another earthling. It wasn't really quite what they were going for, in terms of it wasn't really an earthling, and so it was another creature, and so then the Ha-Adam, the little earthling, names it a fish, or names it, other creatures that come along.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because like I said, so God tries again. This one comes out with a trunk and is huge and heavy and not quite like the earthling, and so it's named an elephant. And then God tries again, and this one comes out with sharp teeth and a fluffy mane and hair, and it's not quite like the earthling, and so it's named a lion by the earthling.
And then God tries again and makes this thing, and it's got a long tail and claws and whiskers, and Adam's oh, that's a cat, and God's I didn't make that. No, I'm just kidding. We have a cat at home. I know there's not cat people out there. That's not even my joke. I heard someone else, I think Rob Bell made that joke before. I'm oh, that's too funny. I know you're a dog person.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. And then, God made this creature that had a long tongue and was just joyful, and it was called a dog, and God was wait, that's my name backwards.
Yes. Right on track.
But anyways, this goes on and on and on and on until all the birds of the air are made, all the fish of the sea are made, all the creatures of the land are made, and all named by that earthling. But yet no earthling, no companion for
suitable.
Suitable companion. I was we love our dogs, and there's people who have rats or cats or snakes as pets and stuff, but there's just a different relationship that you have with those creatures that you keep as pets versus being in relationship with other humans.
Or at least that's how it's supposed to go.
Very fair point. So God has a new idea. And so he puts the little earthling, Ha-Adam, to sleep and removes one of his rib bones, or one of their rib bones at this point, and the earthling, from the earthling, and then forms another earthling. And this person, this little earthling, is called their like helper and companion, and is called, so it's Ish is man in Hebrew, and Isha is woman in Hebrew, and so it's like woman because it's like from the man, and that's the way that God is able to make this like companion to go with the earthling. So now we have two earthlings, and one is made of the other one in order for them to actually fit together and be a companion.
So, wondering about this, and in your studies as well, do you know, and I might be putting you on the spot, and it's okay if you don't know, I'm just curious, is there what's the significance of the rib? And where does that come from? Do you know, is there any like legends about it?
I read a little bit about it because it can either be translated as rib or side. And so it's almost like just like the taking apart or taking a side of one.
Okay.
So I kind of almost think of it as like a little bit of dividing the one in order for the two to be made. But I haven't done a whole lot of dig into like the significance of, if there's significance of being a rib or anything.
I mean, it's just such a weird detail that when I come across this in the Bible, it makes me wonder, like, was there some tribal leader who had one fewer rib than everyone else, and so they like wrote this back into the story to, affirm this? Yeah. Anyways.
I mean, it's definitely possible because some of this stuff is also lost. Like,
right.
These stories are passed down through the oral tradition, and so what we read today is a little bit of a combination of all those oral traditions, and then it's also been edited and translated, and so and because it's ancient Hebrew, there's not necessarily a one-to-one translation, and so some of the stuff just gets a little bit messy in terms of what did they actually mean, and there might have been a significance at one point, but we might have lost that.
Interesting.
History.
No, I'm just curious. Okay.
Yeah. So traditionally, when we read this, we read helper as kind of a status that's like one who's subordinate to Ha-Adam. So
remind me what the words were again. The two words, the word helper that you're talking about.
Helper. We're getting to that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you had already said it.
Jumping ahead. He's scooping my Hebrew.
My bad.
No, so traditionally we read helper as like one who's subordinate to Ha-Adam. So we often will hear this in past literature and sermons and stuff as like the earthling or Adam or Ha-Adam will tell Eve what to do, and this is then has been perpetuated into the patriarchal idea that a wife will submit and obey to her husband because of this like status having been established at this moment. And then this is where you were jumping to. Like,
Sorry, I'm so excited.
No, it's good. And so if we look closer at this word helper, the Hebrew here is ezer kendigo.
Oh.
So ezer kendigo. And that
sounds like a band name.
a little bit. So trying to like go into this without bringing in too many like grammatical weeds with this, but kendigo means corresponding to or on par with. So this would be putting them in a like equal relationship and not a hierarchical one. Like,
yeah. Very egalitarian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can look more as they haven't been named yet, but Adam and Eve are like the Ish and Isha as a helper and as a partner, or that the two complement each other, or even are a counterpart. And the like evidence that we have to support this is that if we go back to God's attempts and failures to make the counterpart, as we discussed before, when God was trying to form another earthling and made lions and elephants and fish and other random birds and cats and dogs, it was never, like God was never able to make another earthling until the rib was pulled out of Adam's, or Ha-Adam's, the little earthling's body, and then an earthling was formed from that And so they are supposed to complement each other because it's like one piece is of another.
One piece of another. And that's what, doesn't Adam even say something like that? Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh?
Yeah.
That comes now?
That comes right
in
now.
the story.
Yep. And so if we look at the first word too, so Ezer, so again we had Ezer Kendigo, so we looked at Kendigo. If we look at Ezer, this means to help, to be strong, to be powerful. Hebrew is a little weird in that sometimes you'll have one word that can mean a whole bunch of things, and so that's why help and strong and powerful might not feel like they fit together, but this word is often associated with God. So for example, in Genesis chapter 49, verse 25, Jacob says, God of your father who will help you. That help is also Ezer, and it's associated with God.
Okay.
Yeah, and so they might not seem like they fit together, but then you start putting other context clues in it, and it makes more sense of like why this one word might mean all of these other words. And so if we put these two pieces together, Ezer Kendigo, and what we kind of talked about, just as God was always intending on being in relationship with humans as a helper, even like a powerful counterpart, God wanted us to be in relationship with one another as helpers and partners and like that powerful counterpart.
So this whole idea all along, we've just taken the word helper and attached it to Eve, and I imagine that this has had a lot of, like where some suppression ideas come from.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're saying is that if you actually look at the Hebrew, and you look at, frankly, Adam's response to what happens, and all of the other pieces, it's very much so that this was about creating equal companions, two parts of the same whole, so to speak.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the whole point to all of this digging that I've done and research that I've done and this whole point of like changing perspectives that I'm trying to point
This is really good. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, is that I think that we can look at this story differently as a story that's calling us into community and relationship and counterpartness with each other. So sure, sometimes that can be romantic. Like, we're told that Adam and Eve were like together romantically, and like that's how the other earthlings were formed. But I really think that the point of this story is that it's pointing us to the commandment of loving your neighbor in like 7 times as many words than when Jesus says that later on.
Ooh, interesting. Okay, say more about that. So it's about loving your neighbor because really it's kind of getting that idea, this idea of that. I mean, I guess that's where I'm wondering about it, is that the origin of people, as opposed to person, is this kind of split. Mm-hmm. But that you're kind of saying where this is what this story is meant to show us is that we're all cut from the same dust.
Like cut from the same dust, but also like counterparts to each other. So I think it's like where one person might not be able to do something or might be weaker or maybe like isn't able to do something on their own.
Not good at Hebrew, right?
Like, now you have another person that can be a counterpart to that person and that is maybe good at those things. So like, I mean, if you want to use your example of like not good at Hebrew and good at Hebrew, like now we're able to have this discussion about Hebrew words and what they might mean and how they might draw us more into the text. Where on your own, like maybe you could have cracked open a book and read someone who's smarter than me, who's good at Hebrew.
Sure.
But we're able to have this conversation, and now your perspective has changed, and I think both of our faith is then deepened and changed as we go along.
Super cool. This is good stuff, Rita.
Yeah, and like I mean that goes for a lot of things. So like there's people who are really talented in music, and people who aren't talented in music but love to listen to music, and so that those are like counterparts to each other. But it even goes deeper in that there's some people who are blessed with resources and people who are born into areas that maybe are less blessed with those resources, and we're able to like give those resources as a counterpart to the person. So we're not any higher up than they are, but we're able to help them, and they're not any higher up than we are, but they're able to like receive that help as that counterpart, and they can teach us about something else like that maybe we're not privy to knowledge wise so far.
Very cool. All right, No, I like that. This is good stuff. Well, hey, thank you for blowing my mind and giving me, as well as our listeners, another perspective. I have a lot to think about tonight. Good stuff. Really cool.
Yeah, that was definitely my hope, is that by giving you this change in perspective for a really well-known story, a story that we hear so many times, that that maybe this has changed your perspective, or maybe it's giving you something to mull over as you reflect on this story the next time you're reading it.
Definitely. Well, Intern Rita, thank you for all you do. Thanks for coming on. And you, listener, thank you for listening. Share this with family and friends. It's a great thing to be passing around, especially during Lent when folks are looking for devotional resources like this. As always, thanks for listening. Stay in peace.